Let's bring in Ken Buck from House Judiciary. Ken, great to see you, Congressman. House Democrats now threatening to call impeachment witnesses themselves if the Senate does not. How would that work?
I have no idea. They obviously could call witnesses into committees and have oversight hearings and ask those witnesses questions that would be on the same subject matter. But this is clearly a fishing expedition. If the House Democrats felt so strongly, they could have called these witnesses. They could have had these witnesses. They could have gone through the court proceedings to force these witnesses to testify over any privilege, or at least had a ruling by the court as to whether privilege would have applied. These witnesses may have nothing to say. This is a delay tactic to try to continue this beyond the point. And I think the point is a 2 or 3 week trial on this issue. But this issue should be dead. We should be moving on to important issues.
Yeah, Democrats are now talking potentially about bringing in Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts on this. He may have to recuse himself because he was weighing in on executive privilege, that argument there. What's your take on the Senate Republicans' so-called kill switch? A rule that would let Trump's team ask for a motion to dismiss the articles fairly quickly after some evidence has been presented, because the Democrats say they have overwhelming evidence that the president did halt aid to Ukraine to force it to look into the Bidens.
Yeah, I think that what Majority Leader McConnell has done is try to make sure that this isn't some sort of political show, that this is a narrow and tight trial, that the president has the rights that he should have had in the House and didn't have, and that the House Democrats can't control the Senate calendar. I think Mitch McConnell is absolutely right in making sure that if the Democrats don't meet a certain threshold, the trial is over and the country gets back to its business.
You know, even CNN is asking why didn't Democrats pursue subpoenas for witnesses in court, and that CNN is also asking the Democrats, are you in danger of interfering with your own 2020 candidates? And I want to get to this. House Intel Chair Adam Schiff, he's a lead manager. He accused the CIA and the NSA of withholding information about Ukraine. He didn't give any evidence of that. Schiff also dodged questions on ABC this week about the credibility of Lev Parnas, the Democrats' new witness. Parnas is under indictment on federal charges, including making false claims. Critics say he wants to get some leniency. What's your reaction on Adam Schiff here?
Well, I think that Adam Schiff had his opportunity and he blew it. He did not present a strong case. He presented a very weak case. It was a partisan vote in the House. If anything, 2 Democrats voted with the Republicans. So Adam Schiff has failed, and he's not going to succeed in the Senate, and he's not going to have a show in the Senate when he failed to put a strong case together in the House.
House impeachment manager Jerry Nadler says any senators who vote against witnesses are part of a cover-up, but then Nadler says any witnesses called about the Bidens, talk about the Bidens, as just part of a smear campaign. The Biden campaign did send out an unusual memo, an open memo to the media warning them about how they cover the Biden's Ukraine conflicts of interest, saying that the story has already been debunked. But author Peter Schweitzer says 5 Biden family members got rich off of using Biden's connections. We're going to go deeper into that story later in the show. I want to get to Senator Ted Cruz saying the president does have a responsibility to investigate the Bidens. Watch.
Because I think one of the fundamental defenses that I expect to hear from the White House this week is that the president has inherent authority and, in fact, a responsibility to investigate corruption. And when you look at what happened with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, there is at a minimum a prima facie evidence of corruption.
Your reaction to that?
I think
let me push back. Democrats are saying this is not material to the articles of impeachment themselves, the Hunter Biden story.
Well, the whole reason that President Trump responded to President Zelensky's statement about Rudy Giuliani and the Bidens was that it is relevant and that there is corruption in the Ukraine, and the president doesn't want to give U.S. taxpayer money to the Ukraine if there is corruption that is ongoing. So he's asked the president of the Ukraine to look into corruption, and that's part of the corruption.
Including a political rival, though, right? Joe Biden.
Including everybody. Just because you run for president doesn't mean you get immunity. But I think in this case, the president of the Ukraine should look into the Bidens, and I think that the U.S. Senate should look into it. I don't know that it needs to be part of this impeachment trial.
Okay, Senator Lindsey Graham really unloading on Nancy Pelosi. Watch this.
Well, to my friends on the Democratic side, you know, I like Nancy Pelosi. I've known her for years, and I think she is a very religious person. But when it comes to Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi may pray for him privately, but she's orchestrated the Church of Holy Hell. From the time Trump has been sworn in to now, it's been one thing after another.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy Pelosi admitted that impeachment started with the Mueller probe 2.5 years ago. Your reaction to the holy hell characterization?
Well, I think the impeachment agenda started before the president was even sworn in. All these Democrats avoided going to the swearing-in ceremony, the inauguration. They have been talking about impeachment since day one. There have been newspaper headlines, let the impeachment begin from day one. It's bad.
Congressman, great to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.